Hey gang, I'm back for a video, a follow-up to a previous video I shared with you all on how to use StatCrunch to do some basic things with frequency distributions and a histogram. This follow-up video talks more about using Microsoft Excel through Pearson's MyLabsPlus site to construct more than just a histogram, but also constructing things like a cumulative frequency polygon, also known as an ogive, or a regular frequency polygon, or a relative frequency histogram. So actually in all, we're going to be making 4 different types of graphs using Excel. And it's going to be a nice, quick, and slick once you get used to the ins and outs of Excel. I believe we have version Microsoft Excel 2016, so just be aware of that. So if you have older versions, you may have slight differences in the layout of Excel, but bear with me. If you do have any differences with menu layout and other differences with your version of Excel, don't hesitate to ask questions, and I'll hopefully be able to answer them as far as how to navigate your version of Excel so that you can do the same things that I'm able to do in 2016 version of Excel. Anyway, let's go back to the same question, or excuse me, a similar question to what we looked at in that earlier video about using StatCrunch. Here we have, this is an exercise from section 2.1 homework. It's basically giving you a raw data set that lists the retirement ages for 24 doctors, and they want you to use the data to construct a cumulative frequency distribution using 6 classes and create an ogive for the data set. Now an ogive is a cumulative frequency polygon, and what it does is it basically illustrates visually the cumulative frequencies as you go down the list. Cumulative frequencies always either stay the same or grow larger. They never fall or drop. Cumulative frequencies grow, and so your graph is going to rise, okay? It should never fall at any point. The graph should always be rising. And so when we do that and create that graph, just bear that in mind. Let's show you how to do this in Excel. So what we're going to do is, if you notice, there's an icon here. They ask you to click to view the data set. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it's going to pop up with a data table here. If you have issues with the pop-ups coming up, make sure you have your pop-up blocker unblocked in your browser. Anyway, if you look at the data, you will see an icon, a small icon to one side that should look like a double pane icon, a double window. Looks kind of like a pop-up window icon. If you click on that, it should give you options to open it in StatCrunch, Clipboard, or Excel. I'm going to go ahead and open it in Excel. Let's go ahead and open with. All right. So what they've done is they've automatically populated the raw data set into Excel. Right off the bat, what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on the number 1 up here, which is row number 1. I'm going to click on the 1 for row number 1 so that it's highlighted, and I'm going to right click. Now that it's highlighted, I'm going to right click and I'm going to insert. When I select insert, that's going to insert a row for me above the data set. So I have a new row up here, and I'm going to give it some labels here. Let's go ahead and click on that number 1 again to highlight the entire row, and I'm going to put everything in bold. Here's italics, underline. I'm going to put it in bold. And I'm going to go ahead and in column A, I'm going to go ahead and call that raw data. And I'm also going to, let's skip a column here. I'm going to call these classes. I'm going to give another column called frequency and another column called relative frequency. Okay. So I'm going to use this information to build my histograms. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and you'll notice there's like a double arrow icon, right? If you hover over the edge of a column and look for this icon right here, it looks like 2 arrows pointing in opposite directions. If you double click, it'll widen the column as wide as you need it so that you can view the entire word in the column. You can double click so that all the words fit in that column, or you could shrink or grow the column as wide or as narrow as you want. That's up to you. Okay. Now, under classes, we're going to figure out what our classes are based on our raw data. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go ahead and highlight these by clicking and dragging to select all of these numbers in the raw data set. And then I'm going to go to sort. Now, if I go to sort, now sort, you should see an icon up in the upper part of your screen towards the right that has, looks like AZ, icon that has AZ in it. Looks like a filter icon. If you click on that and sort from smallest to largest, there we go. Now I have all my data sorted. Makes life easy when you're doing frequencies. I'm going to go ahead and start building my classes. Okay. So first of all, the range goes from 50 to 79. I'll go ahead and make a few notes here. I do this off to the side. So my range is going to be 79 minus 50. In other words, the highest value in the data set minus the lowest, which is, what is that, 29? And then the number of classes I want is, I believe, if we go back to the homework exercise, they wanted 6 classes, okay? Keep that in mind. So number of classes is 6. So the class width, we can find that by taking the range divided by the number of classes, which is 29 divided by 6, which is, oh, what is that? 4 point, oh shoot, I think it's about 4.8 something, 33333. So if you remember, if you get a decimal of any kind, you always round it up to the next whole number. So our class width shall be 5. All right, so our class width is going to be 5. All right, so let's go ahead and start with the first lower limit will be the lowest value in the data set, 50. We'll go ahead and start filling these in. We're going to skip by increments of 5. I should have 6 lower class limits here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now let's go ahead and build the upper class limits. I'm going to go ahead and go in the actual cell contents box up here above. I'm going to go ahead and type in -54. It can't go to 55 because this guy starts at 55. So he has to stop at 54. Then this guy's going to go from 55 to 59. This next class is going to go from 60 to 64. This one's going to go from 65 to 69. Next one, 70 to, you guessed it, 74. And the next one, 75 to 79. Now, if you notice a pattern here, if you look at all your lower class limits, they skip by 5s, which is the class width. And if you look at the upper limits, 54, 59, 64, 69, etc., they all skip by 5 as well. So you've used your class width correctly and consistently, which is what you want. So now we're going to count up our frequencies for each class. So how many numbers fall within 50 to 54? I've got 1, 2, just 2 numbers. Okay. How many fall between 55 and 59? 1, 2, 3, 4. Oops, get up here. There you go. 60 to 64. 1, 2, 3, 4. 65 to 69. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 70 to 74. 1, just 1. And then finally 75 to 79. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, what I want to do down below in that column is I want to actually add those up. And in Excel, there's an easy way to do that. Unlike StatCrunch, in Excel, to enter a formula or a computation formula that does math for you, anytime you want to do a calculation, you have to use an equal sign to use a formula. So in the cell I've selected, I'm going to type use equal sign, and then I'm going to put in capital SUM. And then in parentheses, I'm going to put the cell range of the numbers that I want to add up. So to select the cell range, I'm going to go ahead and use my mouse cursor. I'm going to select those cells in cells D2 through D7. Okay. And then once I've selected them, I'm going to close the parentheses and hit enter. And it will have calculated the sum, which is 24. And if you recall from the original MyLabsPlus exercise, there were 24 doctors' retirement ages in that data set, so it should be correct. There are 24 numbers total. So I'm going to go ahead and make that bold. Now for relative frequency, what we're going to do is we're going to take each of the frequencies in this column and we're going to divide by the 24. So I'm going to do a little math formula where I'm going to take the 2 divided by 24, next one 4 divided by 24, etc. To do that, I'm going to let the calculator do it for me, or excuse me, let Excel do it for me. So in this cell up here, I'm going to go ahead and type an equal sign to tell Excel to do a formula calculation. Put equal sign, and I'm just going to type 2 divided by 24, hit enter, and then I'm going to do equal sign 4 divided by 24, enter, and keep doing that down the list. Uh-oh, it's doing some annoying stuff here. I'm glad this happened because it raises an issue with formatting of cells. If you get if you use a formula and it doesn't come out to a number answer but gives you strange things like a calendar date, what you can do is you can select these cells, and if you right click and go to format cells, you can make sure that they're numbers and not calendar dates, or there's some custom formatting. Sometimes by default they'll make the formatting a date or some non-numerical format. And so sometimes if you enter something like 4-24 or 4 divided by 24, it's thinking you're putting in a calendar date. I don't know why it does that. Sometimes it's really irritating. But yes, you can always go to right click, format cells, and you can go and make it a number or general if you want. General might work better actually. I'm going to go ahead and do that again. I'm going to select all of these cells and I'm going to right click, format cells. I'm going to use general formatting. There we go. Let's try it again. So let's go ahead and do equal sign on the next row. You do 9 divided by 24. Next column or next row equals 1 divided by 24. And then the last one equals 4 divided by 24. And there we have our relative frequencies. Now, there's a lot of decimal places here. It gets a little ridiculous. I believe on most MyLabsPlus homework, they ask you to round to 2 decimal places for relative frequency. So I'm going to go ahead and select these. And then up above in your menu, under the box, it says General for the formatting. There are 2 small icons that indicate that you can move the decimal place over as far as you want so that you have only the decimal places you need. I'm going to use this one to decrease the decimal. And I'm going to decrease it all the way down to 2 decimal places. There we go. And then just to make sure that everything adds up right, if you recall from class, I mentioned that relative frequency should add up to 1. So I'm going to go ahead and verify that by doing a formula down here, the sum of that column. So I'm going to go ahead and do a formula in this cell by first starting out with an equal sign, and then sum, S-U-M, parentheses. Then I'm going to select these cells right here, close the parenthesis, and then I should get 1. All right, go ahead and make that bold. All right, next. Let's go ahead and let's do some graphs, or some charts. And then when we're done with those, we're going to do 2 more charts using some new features like the class midpoints and class boundaries. But we'll get to that in a minute. Let's do 2 types of histograms using this table of information we have here. Let's do the regular frequency histogram first. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and select just the data in these 2 columns. I will not include the headers. Go ahead and just select these actual values right here. Okay, just these. And I'm going to go to Insert. I'm going to do Recommended Charts. And it's going to automatically suggest a histogram. Although notice that in Excel, they have gaps between the bars. We're going to fix that in a minute. Let's go ahead and select that. Click OK. I'm going to change the title to Frequency Histogram. And then to actually close the gap between the vertical bars, here's what I'm going to do. I am going to right-click on the graph area, select from the right-click menu, Format Data Series, and then you'll get a menu over to the right. I'm going to click on what's called Series Options, should already be selected, or Series 1. And then I'm going to click on the vertical bar icon right here. I'm going to close the gap width to 0. And there you go. There's a histogram. Now in Excel, they do things differently than StatCrunch. They label by default the x-axis with the classes themselves, the class limits. Although technically you're supposed to label it with the class boundaries, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over it if you aren't. And we're going to go ahead and leave the class limits there. You can right-click on the graph area and fill it with a different color if you want. Fill it with orange. I'm going to also change the outline color to black so that you can see the outline of the vertical bars better. Let's don't do that. Stop. There you go. I'm going to go ahead and move the graph over a little bit. There we go. So next thing we're going to do is a relative frequency histogram using these values. Okay. So I'm going to select all of these cells, and then holding the control key on my keyboard, holding down the control key, while keeping the control key held or pushed down, I'm going to now select these cells as well. So the control key, if you hold down the control key, it allows you to select columns of data that aren't adjacent to each other. So that's kind of nice. So I skipped over this column since we've already used this column for this histogram here. So I went ahead and selected these and these relative frequencies over here. I'm going to go back up to the insert menu, go to recommended charts. Let's do the histogram again. And then I'm going to change that title to relative frequency histogram. Okay, and then on the graph, I'm going to right-click, go to Format Data Series, and again, you should see a drop-down menu up above with options. Make sure you have the Series Options menu selected. It should be called like Series 1, something like that. And then I'm going to click on this vertical bar icon, and I'm going to close the gap to 0 between my vertical bars. I'm going to right-click again, fill it with a different color. Let's go ahead and do, I don't know, green, and then the outline will make it black. There we go. I'm going to move that over. Not too shabby. You'll notice that frequencies, raw frequency histogram and relative frequency histogram have the same basic shape. Okay, but the relative frequencies are shown on the vertical axis. Over here, the regular frequencies are shown. So the scales are different, but the shape proportions should be the same. The basic shapes should look identical. So let's move on to 2 more types of graphs. We're going to do next what they call a cumulative frequency polygon, or Ogive. That's spelled O-G-I-V-E. And to do that, we are going to I'm going to go ahead and create 2 new columns. I'm going to have a column called class boundaries. And I'm also going to have a column called, let me widen this a little bit, there you go, called cumulative frequency. All right, so under class boundaries, if you recall, if you look at the gap from one class to the next over here, we stop at 54 and then we pick up at 55. Here we stop at 59 and pick up at 60. There's a gap of 1 between classes. There's a small gap of 1. So to get boundaries, you have to take the gap, divide it in half. So the gap of 1 divided in 2 is 0.5. And then you're going to add and subtract 0.5 from the lower number and the upper number in each class to get the class boundaries. So if you look at the first class, it starts at 50. So if you take 50 minus 0.5 is 49.5. And if you add 0.5 to 54, you get 54.5. If you go to the next one, we're going to take away 0.5 from 55 to get 54.5. And then we're going to add 0.5 to 59 to make 59.5. So you're adding 0.5 to the upper number and you're subtracting 0.5 from the lower number. And therefore you close the gaps. And so now there's no gap between the 54.5 here and the 54.5 in the next class. So if we keep doing that, repeat that trend over and over again. You know, actually, hold on a minute. Hold the phone here for just a second. I think I want to do something a little different here. Let's go ahead and just put 49.5, 54.5. Let's just put one boundary in each of these cells here. We'll just go ahead and do that instead. So let's make that 59.5, 64.5, 69.5, 74.5, and 79.5. It's going to make life a little easier. Let's go ahead and just put individual class boundaries in this column here instead of the hyphenated range like we had here. Let's just do that. Notice that as it goes down the list, it skips by 5. All right, so there should be, if you start with 49.5, there should be a total of actually 7 class boundaries. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So there's one more class boundary than there is classes. There were 6 classes, but there should be 7 class boundaries. So now we're going to do the cumulative frequency. When we get to 49.5, we haven't reached quite the first class yet, because the first class starts at 50, so there is no frequency yet. It should start at 0. Your cumulative frequency should always start at 0 for that first class boundary. But by the time you get to 54.5, you will have a frequency of 2. By the time you get to 59.5, you will have 4 more. Well, 4 plus 2 is 6. When you get to 64.5, you'll have another 4. So if you add the 4, and the 2 makes 10. Then when you get to 69.5, you'll have another 9 added to the previous 10, making 19. And then when you get to the next class, you have a 1 for the frequency, but if you add it to the previous sum of 19, you get 20. And then finally, if you add the last frequency to the previous sum of 20, you should get 24. So that is those are the 2 columns of information that we're going to use to build what's called a cumulative frequency polygon, or Ogive. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and click and select these cells. I'm going to insert recommended charts. And if you look carefully, it does have an Ogive here. I don't know which one do we want to select here. I'm going to go ahead and select this one right here. This one seems to start way out on a scale far to the right because it starts at 0. I'm going to go ahead and just use this one. Use this Ogive here, and then click OK. And then we're going to call this Ogive, or what they call a cumulative frequency polygon. Okay, and there you go. Click and, oh, nope, better undo that. All right, I need to select the whole thing and move it down. There we go. So as you can see, the steepest segment of that cumulative frequency polygon is this part right here. It made the biggest jump between 64.5 and 69.5. And sure enough, that is where you have the highest frequency, 9. So it made the biggest leap or jump right about there. That's where you have the steepest segment of the Ogive. So the last graph we're going to make is what's called a regular frequency polygon. It involves a little more work, and it's going to involve a little more information here. To make the regular histogram and the relative frequency histogram, we just needed the 6 classes and the 6 frequencies, or relative frequencies. For Ogive, for this guy down here, we needed 7 boundaries. Well, for the frequency polygon, you're actually going to need 8 rows, because you're going to have to add a couple of additional class midpoints. So let's talk about that. Basically, a frequency polygon, unlike an Ogive or a histogram, the frequency polygon uses the class midpoints, okay, and their corresponding frequency for that class. So what I want to do is I'm going to leave a little space right here because we want to start with a frequency of 0 and we want to end with a frequency of 0. And the reason for that is a frequency polygon should always start on the x-axis and also end on the x-axis. And it's going to look like this graph down here. It's going to be a line graph, except it's going to start by touching the x-axis and it should end by touching the x-axis. So in other words, its height will start at 0 and it will also end at 0. I'm going to leave some space here. I'm going to fill that in later. Leave an empty box here. So down below, I'm going to put the first class midpoint for this class right here. Well, the midpoint is found by averaging the upper and lower limit for that class. Well, who's the average of 50 and 54? 52. Who's the average of 55 and 59? 57. And you'll notice that it skips by 5s. So the next one will be 62, 67, 72, 77, and I think that's all 6 of them, but we have to do 8 numbers. We have to do 8. Now, how does this work? Well, what you're going to do is you're going to fill in 2 more midpoints that are going to be outside this range, and you have to follow the pattern carefully. You have to come up with an extra midpoint down here and another extra midpoint up here, and just follow the pattern. What's the class width? 5. So if you go down by 5 each step, what's the next step? If you go from 57 down to 52, take away 5 again, you should get 47. If you do it the other direction, 67, 72, 77, pattern says 82. Then we're going to put in a 0 for his frequency as well. Okay, so the frequency should start at 0 and end at 0. In between the zeros, you're going to put in these guys. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy and paste. I'm going to select, click Control or hold Control C on my keyboard. And then here I'm going to select these 6 cells, right click and paste wherever the, can't find paste. What happened here? Maybe I didn't copy. Let me try it again. Copy, there we go. And right click, paste, that's more like it. Okay, so now last graph, the frequency polygon. I'm going to select these numbers here. Then I'm going to go to Insert, Recommended Chart, and it should show a frequency polygon. Now, I don't like the graph to start way far away to the right. I want it to start closer to where the axes, the X and Y axis meet. So I'm going to go ahead and pick this one. Click OK. And there's my regular frequency polygon. I'm going to go ahead and label this as frequency polygon, and then we'll be in business. I'm going to go ahead and click and drag this down, and there you have your 4 graphs for your data set. So again, we created a frequency histogram and relative frequency histogram using this information in this table, which I will go ahead and outline for you. We used a Ogive, or created an Ogive, by using this table right here, which was made up of class boundaries and cumulative frequencies. And then finally, we created the regular frequency polygon by using class midpoints and the regular frequencies that you see over here. So remember, with a frequency polygon, you always have to start with a 0 for a frequency and end with a 0. So you basically need 2 extra frequencies on top of these 6 right here. So you'd have to have, well, a total of 8 frequencies in this case. So hope that clears things up for you, and let me know if you have any questions. Thanks for watching.